Climate change is the challenge that we face where we are affecting the way that the Earth's climate system works by increasing the number of electric blankets, basically, that we have around us. We have this wonderful layer of gases up there, greenhouse gases, that make the Earth habitable. But if you put more of those gases up there, you basically add another electric blanket or two or three, and pretty soon you start sweating, even if it's a cold winter night. And so that's really where we are with climate change, is we've been really somewhat unknowingly putting up adding to the atmospheric gases that mean that the planet is warming and that the climate systems are changing. And of course, the thing that's confusing is sometimes the warming appears in other ways. In other words, it could be, for example, that England could find itself quite cold as a result of climate change. So it got called global warming, and a lot of people make fun of the fact that, well, it's not warming, it's also cooling. But that's basically disrupting the patterns that have been established that make it an inhabitable and wonderful planet. Some places colder than others, some places warmer than others, but the addition of these greenhouse gases will make it so that we're changing all those systems and making it so some places become truly uninhabitable. What's interesting is that things like the increased temperature of the ocean make it pretty clear that what we're going to have is additional moisture. That means when it collides with cold air, of course, you can get dramatic snowfalls, like in Boston this winter. Could also mean more intense hurricanes. Interestingly, there's not a connection to tornadoes that's proven yet. But probably the most dramatic things that I think could happen are yet to come, particularly if the tundra starts to melt and we get release of significant quantities of methane. Then this thing could go pretty rapidly. In other words, we could have much more rapid, even than we're experiencing now, climate effects. That's the wild card out there. And what's interesting about the science on that is that since the scientists aren't sure of it, they put it on as a zero. And it really, we may be understating the impacts of climate change, in other words, because until they're sure of it, they don't put it on the scales and say, here's what's going to happen. And so it's a little bit unsure as to what happens if the tundra melts and we get this methane release, or if some of the frozen methane under the oceans, because of the warming of the oceans, starts to melt. That could take this exponential. And so, as I say, right now those are factored in as zero, but they really could be quite dramatic. The connection between humans and climate change is really pretty clear if you think about it just logically. If I burn a tree in my fireplace this winter, no big deal. That tree was just sinking CO2 from the air as part of its life's process, and now I'm burning it. I'm releasing the same carbon connecting with oxygen into the air. Same geological time frame, no big change, no big effect. But if I go deep into the earth and pull up trees that under time and temperature and pressure have been turned into fossil fuels, coal, petroleum, natural gas, bring them to the surface and burn them, I'm clearly changing the chemistry of the air. And then the physics of light are such that light enters, but radiant heat doesn't escape because of the greenhouse effect. Thank goodness, because otherwise we'd be freezing here at night. But that makes warming. And of course, the interesting thing is nothing that I've said so far, the people who dispute the science would object to. They don't object to any of that. That's all pretty clear, is that if you dig up those fossil fuels, you burn them, you're changing the chemistry of the air. And then the physics of light are pretty much undisputed. The dispute comes about how big of an impact humans have. And a lot of people want it to be that we're not responsible. Of course, it could be better if we weren't, right? It'd be so much more convenient if it were just natural processes. But it's not the sun. That's what's often cited, but it doesn't correlate in these current times. And it is things like Mount Erebus in Antarctica releasing a lot of CO2. But that occurs upon an adjusted baseline where we've tipped the baseline up. We've brought it up by our fossil fuel combustion. And so that's a challenge we've got on our hands right now. Yeah, I think the most exciting thing we could do about climate change is figure out a way to use the power of free enterprise to fix the problem. And of course, I think that a lot of fellow conservatives have rejected action on climate because they just don't like the solution that's been offered yet. They don't want to see a regulatory solution. They don't want to see a tax increase solution. But if we can show them a solution that doesn't do those things, that actually is revenue neutral. In other words, if we're going to put a price on these emissions so that you have to pay a tipping fee into the dump, just like you do if you go to the city dump, as you're a trash hauler, you got to pay to take up space in the city dump. Well, we should make people pay for their emissions into the sky. If we do that in a way that cuts other taxes in equal amount, dollar for dollar, so there's no growth of government, then I think that conservatives, we at republicn.org, believe that we can show conservatives this fits with our values. We don't want to grow the government, but we do want to fix this market distortion. And the way to fix a market distortion is to attach those costs, those hidden costs, to the combustion of fossil fuels. And then you get innovation. Then you get consumer-driven demand, not regulatory-driven demand, but rather consumers saying, help me out here. I got a house. I got a nice southern exposure. Can you sell me a solar hot water heater? Well, of course, and you can cut a third of your energy usage by having one of those on your roof. But I don't have one now because it doesn't make sense to have one now in terms of the economics, because I can't control the fact that my electricity comes from, in some cases, coal, and the hidden costs associated with that are reflected in the healthcare system right now. Well, I can't control that, and so therefore I just keep on going the way I'm going, which is using electricity off of the wires rather than putting a solar hot water heater on my roof. If I did that, I'd be cutting my energy usage by a third, but I've got to wait until the economics work. And the economics will work when I start paying the actual cost of electricity rather than the lower price that's really a hidden price because some of the costs aren't attached to it. I think the reason for the lack of consensus comes really out of the Great Recession and the excessive tribalism that developed during that time period. When tribes are under pressure, orthodoxy becomes very important to the tribe. If food is scarce and we're in a tribe, we got to really police each other to make sure we're true to each other. You can't be bringing in your neighbors into our tribe. We got to have just our tribe because we got to band together and get through this thing. That's what the Great Recession was. We got very tribal. The tribalism got to toxic levels. And basically it became what I call populist rejectionism. It's populist, clearly, because it was driven along by populist sentiment. And it's rejectionism. It's rejection of the science of climate change. It's rejection of all things Obama, of course. And it's rejection, more fundamentally, the notion that we can come together and solve really big challenges. That's really counter to where America usually is. America is usually the country that says, you got a problem? We'll find a solution. I think we're going to come back to that normal American affect once we get past the pain of the Great Recession. So the Great Recession was just an aberration for America because there's a time period where we were saying, ain't it so bad, we're done for, and politicians were saying, oh yeah, it is terrible, China's taken over, whatever. But once the economy recovers, we're going to be saying, got a solution to offer? If you got a solution, then come on, let's go do it. Because we, after all, are Americans and we're looking for solutions. Yeah, I think that we are at a time period where we're going to start seeing a drive towards solutions and a desire among the people in America to find a solution to climate change. And it will come when I think that it's going to be affected somewhat by the politics of the 2016 cycle. The Senate map is quite different than the 2014 cycle. The races in 16 are in places like New Hampshire and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Arizona. They're not in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. In those states in 14, it was still populist rejectionism of the science of climate change. So we don't need to worry about it. That's one thing you don't need to think about. Just take that bead off the worry strand, But in those other states in 16, it's going to be very important, especially for people in my party, to start addressing this question. And then, of course, for the presidential contenders on the Republican side, they're going to face an expanded electorate. In presidential years, more people come to vote, and they're younger, and they're more independent, and they're more inclined to think that climate change is a real problem. And so what worked in previous cycles, where there was a low turnout, and you could rile up the base and say, that's one thing you don't need to worry about, by golly, that ain't going to work in the Senate electoral map in 16 and places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Arizona, and it ain't going to work in the presidential race either, because it's going to end up looking so very retro. It's going to look like, well, where'd they get you? You like from some throwback, so I think that's going to change things, and so I'm hoping that my party goes from being the grumpy old party, which is what we got into in the Great Recession, to being the grand opportunity party that says, sure, there's a solution. Yes, free enterprise can solve this problem. Let's go. Let's put all the cost in on all the fuels. Let's eliminate all the subsidies. And then let's watch the free enterprise system sort this thing out. Yeah, there are clearly going to be winners and losers as technology develops the fuels of the future. If you're an incumbent fuel, you may get some additional pressure from these challengers, and so it's going to be uncomfortable for some of the incumbent fuels, coal especially. Natural gas is probably going to do pretty well once we get to a pricing of carbon dioxide. I think that natural gas will do well, but coal is going to be hard for coal. And there's a lot of talk about the war on coal. If there's a war on coal, it wasn't started by Barack Obama. It was started by a guy named George Mitchell in Texas, who perfected fracking. He's the guy who shot the bazooka in the war on coal that caused an increase of supply of natural gas, which means the price dropped, which means right now in South Carolina, 6 coal-fired plants that make electricity are being turned into natural gas plants. That's the war on coal. And so if Barack Obama's got a war on coal, it's basically like the end of Saving Private Ryan, where the captain is down on the ground and he's got his handgun and he's shooting at the tank. George Mitchell is the tank, and Barack Obama is the .22 pistol shooting at the tank in the war on coal. Yeah, and actually it proves the point that we make at republican.org that market forces really work. I mean, there you can see it. You have a price signal causing innovation to happen. And we're breathing better in South Carolina right now because these 6 coal-fired plants are being turned into natural gas plants. Not a perfect solution because there's still emissions there, but they are a lot less than the coal-fired plants. And so people are healthier, the air is better, and the long-term climate effects are far better. At republican.org, I spent a lot of time during the school year speaking to energy clubs at business schools, Federalist societies at law schools, college Republican groups at universities. But in the summer, not so much because they're not in session. And so I've been doing some boys' state programs and girls' state programs. I had the opportunity to speak at Kentucky Boys State and West Virginia Boys State. And those are tough places to present our message that we want to price the hidden effects of the burning of coal and natural gas and add those to the meter, basically, so that innovation can happen. That's a pretty tough message in West Virginia and places like Kentucky. But last summer at West Virginia, what I said to the boys there at Boys State was, learn from us in South Carolina. When the country decided that it liked cheaper clothes, our textile industry went under the bus. And I told them, coal is going under the bus. And someday you're going to be the actual governor of this state, not Boys State. And you better be ready to do something like we got done in South Carolina with the amazing work of Governor Carroll Campbell. And that is, we essentially replaced many of those jobs in the textile industry with the automotive industry. And so were it not for BMW in Spartanburg, we would be really in a world of hurt. As the textile industry changed and a lot of those jobs went elsewhere, thankfully, many of them were replaced by us making cars. So I said to the boys in West Virginia, that's what you got to do. You can bay at the moon if you want to about how it is. It's a war on coal and it's all these awful things they're doing to us. No, what's happening is people are deciding they don't want that dirty stuff anymore. They want cleaner fuels. They want things that are innovative, not this same old stuff we've been using forever. And you can't hold that back. Just like if you're a medallion owner in New York City, just try to hold back Uber. It's not going to work for you. If you were the textile industry, just try to hold back the American people from buying those cheaper clothes that they decided they liked. You can't do it. And so in the case of coal, you can't hold it back. They're going to be ready to innovate. But that's a hard message because there's no sugarcoating there. Way too many people in the environmental left try to say, oh, well, all those people get jobs installing solar units. No, they won't. They won't. It's going to be hard in West Virginia unless they find something else. Thank goodness, like I say, in South Carolina, we found BMW to replace those textile jobs. Great question, because it's essential that we figure out a way to get the whole world in on this. Because if we're just acting by ourselves, there's a real problem. Because if we, for example, take action on CO2 and essentially increase the cost of energy or make it actually go more towards true cost, and other countries don't do that, then what may happen is people pick up and move those jobs, that productive capacity, to those countries that don't say, no, we want all the cost in on these fuels. But when they go there, say pick up and move to China, they're going to emit more there than they were emitting here because China is less efficient than we are. And so we become double losers if we don't get the world to come with us, because we lose employment and we lose the race to reduce global emissions. So we've got to find a way to not be the double losers. We think at republicn.org that the way to do it is to make any pricing of carbon dioxide border adjustable. What that means is our tax, our carbon tax that we're imposing on ourselves, and by the way, essential to us is that be paired with a dollar for dollar cut in other taxes, so there's no growth of government. But our tax would be collected on imports as they come into the country. And if that's upheld by the WTO, World Trade Organization, there's a fight there, but we think we can win it. If it's upheld by the WTO, then we figure that China, within about 24 hours, because they have an amazing way of reaching consensus, as you know, would then follow suit. And the reason is they'd figure out, on entry into the United States, we're paying a tax to Washington. If we had just done the same thing in China, we'd be paying the tax to Beijing. 24 hours later, after it's upheld by the WTO, they've got the same pricing of carbon dioxide, and then the whole world follows. And so energy goes to its more actual price. We've got the thing that's sort of hard for us to explain at the moment, but I think it's going to become clear, is that it's artificially low right now. It doesn't have all the cost in on it. When we burn coal to make electricity, we're not factoring in the fact that we're allowing people to socialize their soot. That soot goes up in the air, ends up in people's lungs, they go to the hospital. We pay all right. And we conservatives, we believe that Milton Friedman was always right. And in 1975, he wrote a book, the title of which was There's No Such Thing as a Free Lunch. We think he's right. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and we are currently paying the full cost of coal-fired electricity, just not at the meter. Pay some at the meter and some in healthcare. So why not put that all on the meter? And once it's on the meter, then I, as a consumer, in the liberty of enlightened self-interest, start innovating. Now, of course, as I said, it's essential to get China and India and other countries in on the deal too. And the way to do that is to collect that same pricing on carbon dioxide on entry of their goods into the United States. And then they decide to do the same thing in their country without an international agreement. The beauty of this is it doesn't take that agreement. It takes really just a bold commercial move by the United States. A little bit like the cell phone companies that unfortunately are too small to make my great big cell phone company give me contractless service for my telephone. I'm indentured to my company for about 10 years, I think, on my iPhone or something. I'm in a contract forever with them. But there are these little companies that say, we'll give you contractless service. If they were just a little bit bigger, then my big old company would have to do what they're doing. We're in the position of that big company as the United States. If we act, the rest of the world will follow, because it'll be in their interest to follow, because we're going to be collecting it on entry into the United States, so they may as well collect it back at home. And then you don't have to have this complicated international agreement that takes forever to negotiate. So the exciting thing for conservatives, I think, is to realize, we got something to offer here. It's not like what's been unfortunate about the whole setup so far is this is a conversation started by liberals that conservatives feel uncomfortable in. And so what we're trying to do at republicin.org is change that so that conservatives feel like they have something to offer in the conversation. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And at some point, we're going to figure that out. And at some point, we're going to figure out, too, that the world is counting on America to solve this. I was in Ireland for a conference, and I thought I'd be treated sort of like, why don't you Americans get with it? But that isn't the way they were treating me. They were saying to me, basically, we need you. We count on you, America, to do these things, to lead. And so I think we got a danger in climate change, but we also have an incredible opportunity to light up the world with distributed energy systems. In other words, microgrids, solar and batteries, that mean that villages in India and Africa that have never had lights at night to study will be studying, and they'll add their productive capacity and creativity to the world's supply. And this is an exciting time. So it's not just danger, it's also an incredible opportunity.